we got some unfortunate news out of the August inflation report, revealing that while there was a slight decrease in that inflation figure, it was not at all the drop that people were hoping for and expecting, and it did cause a big freak out on Wall Street. Stock market did not take kindly to it. So we'll look at the specifics here in just a second, and then we'll watch this clip of Joe Biden getting cut off by CNN. They were broadcasting his kind of celebratory speech about the Inflation Reduction Act, but then they have to cut off that to talk about the bad inflation numbers. Just kind of an awkward moment. But first, I want to make sure everyone's clear on this because there seems to be some confusion. 8.3% was the figure we got out of the August report. That means that for the year ending in August, the entire year, there's 8.3% inflation, which is really high. It's not, though, which some people seem to think, 8.3% in that 1 month inflation. So, for example, the year ending in the previous July was 8.5% inflation. So we're seeing it drop ever so slightly. Again, not at all where we had hoped and expected, and really what people need to start getting a handle on this. So reading from the New York Times, inflation remained uncomfortably rapid in August despite a decline in gas costs as prices continued to soar across a broad array of other goods and services. Evidence that the sustainable slowdown the Federal Reserve and White House have been hoping for remains elusive. Prices rose 8.3% from a year earlier, compared with 8.5% in July. And then looking at how this affected the economy immediately, yesterday's surprise of an inflation report, which showed consumer prices rose last month rather than fell, as many had predicted, continues to buffet the markets. Stocks in Asia and Europe sank this morning as fears grow that to cool off inflation, central banks, led by the Fed, will need to quash consumer demand through more aggressive interest rate increases. Economists at Nomura and Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary, are among those arguing that the Fed should raise its benchmark rate by a full percentage point next week. The S&P 500 tumbled more than 4% yesterday, the biggest one-day drop since June 2020 on interest rate jitters. So because the solution seems to be raising interest rates, the Fed doing so, there's that negative reaction from the markets because that is not something that they want to hear. But then again, showing that moment that I alluded to of Biden getting cut off by CNN with this news.
Thought was even remotely possible when I entered office. So I thank the Republicans who stood up.
Okay, you're listening there to President Biden at the White House. He's celebrating the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. He says that he's been fighting Big Pharma for decades. But there is this unfortunate split screen right now with the Dow taking a total beating, down more than 1,200 points. And so it feels like it's hard to be celebratory for some people in the crowd.
Yeah, this is the day on which the White House celebrates the Inflation Reduction Act, when we get a new report that shows that inflation is still especially high. And what we're seeing on Wall Street is a reaction to that, anticipating what's coming from the Fed, the decision that will come on whether to increase, well, likely they will increase, but by how much, the interest rates, another half point or 3/4 of a point, we'll have to see in just a few days.
And we saw in that article, one of the recommendations was an entire point, which would be quite significant. So it is an awkward moment to cut off a celebration from the president. Again, he was doing this event talking about the successes of the Inflation Reduction Act, cutting that off to talk about the negative inflation numbers that we got, the worse than expected numbers. Now, that doesn't take away from the significance of the Inflation Reduction Act. I think at this point, we all understand that piece of legislation is so much more than addressing inflation. That's kind of one of the smallest parts of it, funny enough. So you could make a criticism that why would you call it that if it's not actually primarily addressing inflation? Or most analysis shows maybe over the long term it'll have an effect on inflation, but as far as here and now, not so much. I think politically it was a smart move, but I do understand that criticism. But all the things in it are really incredible that they're getting done. But just as far as the aesthetic goes, sort of weird to have to get cut off from your Inflation Reduction Act celebration to talk about the bad inflation numbers. So there we go. This definitely is going to have a negative effect on Biden's approval rating likely. But more so this just represents what people are feeling. So this is more putting a digit to what people are already feeling and reacting to. So who knows if this news will actually have a huge political effect, because people are already responding politically to what they're feeling economically day to day. And so we'll see how the Biden administration tries to handle this, how Democrats try to do so, because it is really close now to the midterms. So each one of these little economic pieces of news matters a lot. But that's it. Inflation not dropping at the rates we had hoped, quite unfortunately. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support what I do as well as get access to the full show, all of the stories hours before any of the clips are uploaded to YouTube, plus a weekly bonus show, you can go to patreon.com/Luke Beasley. That's patreon.com/Luke Beasley.